The whip cracked through the air with a sharp sound that made even the children laugh. The alien woman tied to the wooden post jerked as the leather bit into her back. Her skin was already marked with deep red lines, some bleeding fresh, others turning dark and ugly. Around her, the crowd clapped and shouted as if this pain was nothing more than a game. Vendors selling food and toys moved among them, shouting their own deals, as if the suffering of one woman was just another part of the day's entertainment. A tall alien guard raised his voice, waving the whip high. $1, one whip, he shouted, and the crowd cheered. Men and women pulled out coins and notes, pushing each other to get closer. Each wanted a turn, not because they hated her, but because the laughter and screams were what they had come for. To them, it was sport. To her, it was torture. The alien woman's hair clung to her face with sweat, her lips trembling as she whispered words no one cared to hear. She had once been proud, perhaps even noble, but here she was only an object. A slave turned into a toy. Every crack of the whip tore away a piece of her dignity, but the crowd did not see her as a person. They saw her as a way to pass the afternoon. A small alien child jumped up and down, begging his father for money. "Please, I want to try." The father laughed and handed him a coin. The guard smiled cruelly as he bent down and helped the boy lift the whip. The boy swung clumsily, and though the lash barely struck her side, the alien woman cried out. The boy laughed and clapped his hands. The crowd roared with delight. Her legs shook, her knees almost giving way, but the chains that held her wrists above her head forced her to remain standing. The metal rubbed her skin raw, each movement tearing more flesh. She wished to collapse, to let darkness take her, but the whip kept her alive in pain. She dared not close her eyes for long. The next strike would come, and she had to brace for it. "Next! Who's next?" the guard shouted again. A man stepped forward with a grin, tossing a crumpled bill. He swung with all his strength, the whip tearing across her shoulder. She screamed, the sound echoing across the bazaar. The man lifted his arms in triumph like a champion, and the crowd applauded. Among the crowd stood a figure who did not laugh. A human, dressed in worn clothes, his face hidden under the shadow of a hood. He did not clap or cheer. His hands were tight fists at his sides. His jaw clenched so hard it looked as if his teeth would break. He watched every lash, every coin exchanged, and his heart burned with anger. Around him, the aliens shoved and shouted, but his eyes never left the woman at the post. The smell of sweat, dust, and spilled drink mixed with the stench of blood. The sun hung high, merciless, baking the sand beneath their feet. Flies circled lazily around the woman's wounds. The guard's whip glistened with dark stains. And still, the line of people stretched long, each waiting for their turn to play. The woman's voice cracked as she tried to beg. "Please stop." But the guard slapped her across the mouth, silencing her. "No one wants to hear a beast talk," he sneered. The crowd laughed again. Somewhere behind the human, two aliens argued over who would get the next strike. One raised his voice. "I have 2 coins. Let me have 2 turns." The guard's grin widened. 2 coins, 2 whips, he called, and the crowd cheered even louder. The alien woman's body stiffened, her breath catching in her throat. She knew she would not last much longer. The human's nails dug into his palms until they broke the skin. He could not look away. Each scream felt like a dagger stabbing into his chest. Every laugh around him was another flame feeding his fury. Yet he stood still, waiting, watching, his breath slow and heavy. The guard cracked the whip into the air again, enjoying the fear it brought to her eyes. "This is your last chance," he taunted her. "Beg properly, maybe they will pay more." The woman did not answer, too weak now, her head drooping forward. The crowd booed, unhappy with her silence. "Make her scream again," someone shouted. The next coin was thrown, the whip lifted. The human took a single step forward. The crowd did not notice, still focused on the woman. Another step. His boots crunched in the sand. The whip rose higher, ready to fall. The woman closed her eyes, expecting the pain. The human was close enough now to see her face clearly, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, her lips cracked, her eyes dull but not yet dead. In that instant, he knew what he must do. His fists unclenched, his body straightened. He could not let this continue. The guard shouted again, $1, 1 whip, and the whip came down. But just before it struck, the human's voice cut through the laughter. Low, steady, filled with something no one else in the marketplace had, the sound of defiance. Enough. The single word froze those near him. Some turned their heads. The guard frowned, whip still in his hand. The alien woman's eyes opened, her body trembling. She looked at the man who had spoken, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat, confused and restless. Then laughter began again, mocking the stranger. A human? Someone jeered. What can he do? Another shouted, throw him a coin and let's whip him instead. The guard sneered, pointing the whip at him. What did you say, human? The man raised his head, and the hood slipped back. His face was covered in dust, his eyes sharp and burning like fire. His lips curled in anger, but his voice was calm when he repeated himself. I said enough. The marketplace of cruelty held its breath. For the first time that day, the whip did not strike. The guard's hand tightened around the whip, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the human who dared to interrupt. The crowd murmured, restless, half expecting the man to back down, half waiting to see him beaten for his boldness. Dust swirled in the dry air, and the alien woman hung weakly in her chains, her head turning slowly toward the man who had spoken. She could not believe someone had stepped forward for her. The guard sneered and stepped closer. Do you want her place, human? He growled. The crowd erupted in laughter, shouting and whistling, hungry for a new show. Some clapped their hands, urging the guard to whip the man. Others pointed fingers, mocking. To them, this was better than the woman's screams. This was fresh entertainment. The human did not move. His stance was firm, his shoulders squared, his eyes fixed on the guard. No more, he said, his voice steady. Not another strike. His words carried through the market, quieting the jeers for a moment. The guard tilted his head, almost amused. Or what? He taunted, cracking the whip against the ground with a snap. The sound echoed through the marketplace. But the man did not flinch. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the chained woman. The crowd gasped, some even stepping back. The woman's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever come this close except to hurt her. The human stood just in front of her, blocking the whip with his own body. The guard's laughter was loud and cruel. So the human wants to play hero, he said. Fine, let us see how long he lasts. He raised the whip high and brought it down with force. The leather lashed across the man's shoulder with a crack that tore through cloth and skin. Blood welled instantly, soaking into his shirt. The crowd shouted in excitement, expecting him to fall to scream, but he did not. The man's jaw tightened, but he made no sound. His eyes did not leave the guard. Slowly, he turned his head toward the woman. She stared at him with wide, shocked eyes. He gave her the smallest nod, as if to say, "You are not alone anymore." For the first time in years, her lips trembled with something that was not fear. Hope. Again, someone from the crowd yelled, throwing a coin forward. The guard laughed and swung once more. The whip struck across the man's back, tearing deeper this time. His knees bent slightly from the force, but still he did not fall. His fists clenched, his breathing heavy, but his gaze never broke. The crowd was stunned into silence for a moment before erupting into even louder cheers. The guard's grin faltered. He had seen many slaves, many victims, but never one who stood through the lashes like this. Stronger than you look, he muttered, annoyed. The human's lips curled into a grim smile. Stronger than you think. Another coin flew through the air. Hit him again! Someone shouted. The guard obliged, swinging hard. The whip cracked across the man's chest this time, cutting the skin open. Blood trickled down, staining his clothes. The alien woman cried out softly, her voice breaking. She had thought him a fool, but now she saw his defiance was no madness. It was choice. He was taking her pain upon himself. The man straightened again, his breathing ragged. He spat blood to the side, then lifted his chin. You enjoy this? He asked the guard, his voice hoarse but strong. Hurting those who can't fight back? Try me then. I am still standing. The crowd roared at his challenge. Some cheered for the guard, but a few eyes in the crowd shifted uneasily. The sight of a human enduring the whip without crying out was not what they expected. It was not weakness they saw now, but defiance. The guard's face darkened. He raised the whip again, but this time, before he could strike, the man took a step closer, standing so near the alien woman that his shoulder brushed against her arm. His body was now her shield. The guard hesitated, his arm frozen mid-air. If he struck again, the lash would not just hurt the human, it might protect her. The woman's tears fell silently as she whispered, "Why?" Her voice was faint, almost lost in the noise of the market. The human heard her and answered without looking back. "Because someone has to stop them." His words carried no drama, no hero's pride. They were simple, but in their simplicity, they were powerful. The guard growled in frustration, snapping the whip against the ground instead. The crowd booed, demanding more blood. "Coward!" someone shouted. "Hit them both!" another yelled. The man's hand slowly lifted, palm open, as he stared at the guard. "Go on then. Take your coin. But strike me, not her." The alien woman closed her eyes. She had been beaten so many times that her spirit had nearly died. But now she felt something stir inside her. This man, this stranger, was facing her tormentors without fear. His blood was dripping for her sake. Her chest ached with something she had not felt in years. Courage. The guard's hand trembled with anger. He had never been challenged in his own marketplace. His whip was a symbol of power, and now it looked weak against the human silence. He lashed out again, his strokes wild, furious. The whip cut the man's flesh again and again, but still he did not fall. The crowd, once laughing, now watched in stunned silence, their cheers fading. Finally, the guard stopped, panting, his chest heaving with rage. The human stood bloodied, his body covered in lashes, but his eyes still burned with fire. He looked straight at the guard and whispered words that chilled the air. "You cannot break me." The marketplace froze. The alien woman lifted her head, her chains rattling as she stared at him. For the first time since her capture, her heart dared to believe that freedom was possible. And the crowd, who had come for cruelty and laughter, now found themselves staring at something far more dangerous, a human who would not bend. The human's body was trembling with pain, but his eyes still glowed with fire. The whip had left red and bleeding marks across his back and chest, but he did not bow down. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Some laughed nervously, others frowned as if something in their hearts was stirring. They had expected the human to scream, to beg, to fall, but instead he stood like a wall, refusing to give them the pleasure of his weakness. The guard's pride was burning now. His hand shook as he clutched the whip. He had whipped hundreds before, slaves, thieves, even rebels, and every one of them had cried out. But this human did not. Each lash that should have broken him only made him look stronger. The silence of his suffering was louder than any scream. The guard growled. "You think you're brave, human? You think you can protect her?" He spat on the ground. "You are nothing. A coin can buy your skin as easily as hers." The man's lips curled in a faint smile, though blood dripped from them. His voice was low, but steady. "Then take their coin. I will stand here. I will take every lash you dare give." The crowd gasped. Some shouted in excitement, others muttered that the human was insane. But slowly, a few coins began to fly forward. Not for the alien woman this time, for him. People threw their money at the guard, shouting, "Whip the human! Let's see how long he lasts." The guard's grin returned. "You asked for this." He lifted the whip again and struck. The leather tore into the man's shoulder. The sound of flesh breaking filled the air. The human staggered but caught himself, his knees refusing to bend. His jaw clenched, his breath heavy, but he stayed upright. The crowd roared, some with cheers, some with disbelief. Another coin was tossed, another lash. The whip cracked against his chest, cutting through his already torn shirt. Blood sprayed, and the alien woman cried out in shock. She struggled in her chains, her voice shaking. "Stop! Please stop!" But the guard only laughed. The man turned his head toward her, even as blood trickled down his side. "Do not waste your breath," he whispered. "They will not stop, but I will not let them break you anymore." The guard snarled, striking again and again. Each blow echoed across the market. The human's body shook with the force, but his feet did not move. His hands, hanging loosely at his sides, curled into fists, but he did not raise them. He wanted no mistake. This was not him fighting for himself. This was him standing in her place. The alien woman stared at him with wide eyes, her heart pounding. She had seen many die under the whip. She had seen the strongest collapse within minutes. Yet here was a man, blood dripping from a dozen wounds, and still he stood for her. Something inside her chest burned, something she had thought long dead. Hope. The crowd, once full of mocking laughter, now watched in strange silence. A few whispered to each other, uneasy. "How can a human endure this?" one muttered. "He should have fallen by now." Another shook his head, unable to look away. Maybe humans are not so weak. The guard's arm grew heavy, sweat dripping down his brow. He had whipped the man again and again, and yet still he stood. Frustration twisted his face. Why won't you scream? Why won't you fall? The man lifted his head, his bloodied face still burning with defiance. His voice was ragged, but every word struck like iron. Because I am not here for you. I am here for her. The alien woman's eyes filled with tears. Her lips trembled, unable to form words. For the first time in her captivity, someone had said she was worth standing for. That someone would take her pain willingly, not for money, not for cruelty, but for her dignity. Another coin clinked against the ground, but fewer now. The crowd hesitated, unsure. Some were drawn in by the human's strength, others disturbed by their own enjoyment. A man shouted angrily, "Whip him harder! Make him scream!" But his voice was drowned by murmurs spreading through the marketplace. The guard swung again, his fury blinding him. But this time, as the whip cracked, the human's hand shot out. His palm caught the leather midair. The crowd gasped in shock. The guard yanked, but the human held firm, blood dripping from his hand as the sharp leather cut into his skin. Slowly, painfully, he pulled the whip forward. The guard's grin faded. The human's eyes locked onto his, filled with something primal, something unshakable. "No more," the man growled. With one last tug, he ripped the whip from the guard's grip. The leather dangled in his hand, stained with his own blood. The marketplace froze. No one had ever dared touch the whip before. The alien woman's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. She could not believe what she was seeing. This broken, bleeding man had just taken the very tool of her tormentor and turned it powerless. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some shouted in outrage, others in awe. A few even clapped, as if cheering for the courage they had just witnessed. The guard stumbled back, his face pale with rage and fear. He pointed at the human, his voice trembling now. You will die for this." The man dropped the whip to the ground. His shoulders were bleeding, his back torn open, but he stood taller than ever before. He spread his arms slightly, as if daring them all. "Then let me die standing," he said, "but you will never whip her again." The alien woman's knees buckled, her chains rattling as she sobbed. But these were not tears of despair anymore. These were tears of something else, something she had forgotten existed. The crowd no longer laughed. They no longer looked at her as a toy. Their eyes were fixed on the human, the man who had turned their cruel game into a moment they would never forget. In that instant, the marketplace of cruelty began to crumble, not with fire or battle, but with the unshakable will of one human who refused to bow. The alien woman lifted her head slowly, her eyes full of disbelief as she looked at the man standing in front of her. His body was covered in blood, his clothes torn, yet he stood like a shield between her and the guard. No one had ever done this for her before. Her lips trembled, and with great effort she whispered, "Why? Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." The human turned his head slightly, his breath heavy but steady. His face was pale from blood loss, yet his eyes burned with strength. "I don't need to know you," he said softly. "It is enough that you are in pain. It is enough that they laugh while you bleed. That is reason enough for me." Her heart shook at his words. She had been treated like dirt for so long, like a thing with no name, no worth. For years, the only voices she heard were of mockery, cruelty, and orders shouted at her. And now, this stranger spoke as if her life mattered. It was as if he had reminded her she was alive, that she was still someone. The crowd had grown quiet, watching the exchange. Some were still angry, demanding more blood, but many were silent, their eyes fixed on the human's defiance. A few even looked uncomfortable, as if shame had slipped into their hearts. The marketplace that had been filled with laughter now trembled with uncertainty. The guard, still shocked from losing his whip, snarled and pulled out a short blade from his belt. His pride could not allow this human to humiliate him in front of everyone. "You think you're a hero?" he shouted, pointing the blade at the man. "You'll die here, and no one will even remember your name." The human did not move back. He planted his feet firmly in the sand and raised his chin. "Then I will die standing," he answered, "and they will remember the day one human refused to kneel." The alien woman's chest tightened, her eyes filling with tears. She had seen warriors boast. She had seen rebels scream. But never had she heard words spoken so calmly, with such conviction. He was not seeking glory. He was not performing for the crowd. He was simply standing because he believed it was right. The guard lunged forward, but before he could strike, the woman pulled against her chains with all her strength. The metal bit into her wrists, blood dripping down, but she screamed, "No!" Her cry was raw, desperate, and filled with something the crowd had not expected, defiance. It was the sound of a broken slave daring to fight back, even if only with her voice. The human glanced at her, and their eyes met. In that single moment, something passed between them. It was not spoken, but it was clear. A bond had formed, fragile, unseen, yet unbreakable. She was no longer just a victim, and he was no longer just a stranger. They were both standing together against the cruelty of the world. The guard swung the blade, but the human moved faster than anyone thought possible. Despite his wounds, he caught the guard's wrist, twisting it hard until the blade clattered to the ground. The crowd gasped, shock rippling through them. The human kicked the weapon away and shoved the guard back. His voice rang out, louder than it had been all day. "This ends now." For the first time, the people saw fear in the guard's eyes. His power was slipping away. He looked to the crowd for support, but the cheers that had once fueled him were fading. Some people stayed silent. Others lowered their heads. The laughter that had filled the air only moments ago was gone. The alien woman, still bound, whispered again, her voice trembling. "You are bleeding. They will kill you." Her words were heavy with worry, but the human only shook his head. "Let them try," he said. "Your life is worth every wound I take." Her breath caught, and her body shook with emotions she could not name. For years, she had begged for mercy and received none. For years she had cried, and no one listened. But now, a stranger who had no reason to care was ready to give his life for her. She had never known such strength, not in her people, not in her captors, only in him. The guard tried to gather himself, but his hand trembled as he faced the human again. Bah! The whip was gone, the blade was gone, and so was his dominance. For the first time, the alien woman saw the guard for what he truly was. Not powerful, not untouchable, but afraid. The human had taken that power away simply by refusing to break. The crowd watched closely, their whispers growing. A woman in the back muttered, "Why is he doing this?" A man beside her said, Maybe she is not worthless after all." The words spread slowly, like sparks catching dry grass. For the first time, people began to question what they had accepted for so long. The alien woman lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. She whispered to herself, "I am not nothing. I am not nothing." She repeated it like a prayer, as if the human's actions had awoken something long buried inside her. The man turned back to her, and though his body swayed with weakness, he smiled faintly. "Hold on," he said. "I will get you out." His voice was gentle, carrying a promise she had never heard before. Her lips parted, and she spoke without thinking. "You are not like the others," she said, her voice breaking. "You see me, as if I am still alive." The human nodded once, his eyes fierce even through the blood and pain. "Because you are alive," he said, "and no one has the right to take that from you." The words struck her like thunder. The chains still bound her, but in that instant, she felt lighter. The darkness that had swallowed her spirit began to break. She was still afraid, but now there was something stronger inside her, faith in the man standing before her. The marketplace was silent now. All eyes were on them, the bloodied human who would not kneel, and the broken woman who had found her voice again. It was no longer just a cruel game. It was something far greater. A moment that would be remembered. The guard, breathing hard, hesitated before stepping back. He realized too late that the whip, the blade, even the chains were powerless now. What he faced was not just one human. It was the truth that cruelty could not crush courage. And in the eyes of the woman and the man, that truth burned brighter than any weapon. The guard stumbled back, his pride wounded more than his body. His eyes darted around the marketplace, searching for support, for the laughter and cheers that always fueled his power. But the crowd was no longer the same. Some still wanted blood, their faces twisted with anger that the game was being ruined. Others stood silent, uneasy, their excitement dimmed by the human's defiance. The balance of the moment shifted like sand underfoot. Two more guards pushed through the crowd, their armor clinking, heavy boots kicking up dust. They carried long batons, their faces hard and cruel. "What's going on here?" one barked, glaring at the human. The first guard pointed at him with shaking hands. "This human dares to interfere. He thinks he can stop the show." The new guards sneered, moving closer, their batons raised. "Then he will be part of the show," one said, his voice dripping with malice. The crowd cheered again, finding fresh hope for violence. The alien woman's chains rattled as she pulled against them, her voice breaking. "No! Leave him! Please!" Her cries only made the guards laugh harder. The human turned slightly toward her, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't be afraid," he whispered, though his own body shook with pain. His back was a map of bleeding stripes, his chest cut open, but still he stood straight. He spread his arms wide as the guards approached, as if daring them to strike him again. The first baton swung, cracking against his ribs with a thud that echoed in the air. He staggered, but did not fall. His eyes squeezed shut from the wave of pain, but when he opened them, his glare was as fierce as before. The second guard swung from the other side, the baton smashing into his shoulder. The human's body twisted, blood spraying from his mouth, yet his knees refused to touch the ground. The crowd gasped, torn between cheering and staring in disbelief. Whispers rose again. "He should be down. No one can take that much." Another voice, quieter, said, "Maybe humans are not as weak as we thought." These words spread like sparks, catching in the minds of those who had come only for entertainment. The guards kept beating him, strike after strike, their fury growing with every moment he refused to fall. His body became bruised and battered, blood dripping into the dust, but still, he endured. Each blow that should have ended him only made the alien woman's heart pound louder. She pulled harder against her chains, her wrists tearing open, but she did not care. She wanted to fight beside him. She wanted to scream until the sky broke. One of the guards laughed bitterly. "Look at you, still standing? You think this makes you strong? You'll die for nothing." The human lifted his head slowly, his lips bloody, his teeth gritted. "Not for nothing," he rasped. His voice was cracked, but powerful enough to reach the ears of every person in the square. "For her." The alien woman's tears spilled over. Her chest heaved, her body shaking. She could hardly breathe, her heart torn between fear and awe. No one had ever said those words for her. No one had ever chosen to suffer, so she would not. She whispered his words under her breath, clinging to them like a lifeline. For her. The guards, angered by his defiance, rushed him together. Batons struck his back, his chest, his arms. He blocked what he could with bleeding hands, but many blows landed. His body bent, but his spirit did not. He forced himself upright again and again, each time slower, each time harder, but always rising. The crowd's noise grew restless. The sight of this bloodied man refusing to surrender twisted something deep inside them. Finally, the human's arm shot out. With a surge of desperate strength, he grabbed one guard's baton mid-swing. The wood slammed into his palm, splitting skin, but he held on. With a growl, he yanked the weapon away and swung it back, cracking it across the guard's knee. The alien howled in pain and collapsed, clutching his leg. The crowd roared in shock. Some cheered wildly, others screamed in outrage. The second guard lunged, but the human turned, swinging the stolen baton. It struck across the alien's jaw with a sickening snap, sending him crashing to the ground. The first guard, who had lost his whip earlier, stumbled back, his courage melting away. His hands shook as he pointed. "Kill him! Kill that human!" But no one moved. The crowd, once eager for blood, was no longer certain. They stared at the broken, bleeding man who had just taken down two armed guards. He was covered in wounds, his body trembling on the edge of collapse, yet he looked like a giant in their eyes. The alien woman's breath caught. Her chains rattled again as she leaned forward, whispering, "Please, please don't die." Her voice cracked with something she had never felt before, hope so sharp it hurt. The human turned toward her, his chest rising and falling like a storm, sweat and blood mixing on his skin. His lips curved into a faint smile. "I told you," he said softly. "You are not alone anymore." The first guard screamed in frustration, drawing a dagger from his belt. He charged at the human, rage blazing in his eyes. The man lifted the baton to block, but his strength was failing. His body staggered as the dagger slashed across his side. Blood poured, and his knees buckled for the first time. The alien woman cried out, a scream that split the air. But just as the guard raised the dagger for a killing blow, the human lunged with the last of his strength. He drove the baton into the guard's stomach, forcing him back. The guard fell, gasping and clutching his belly. The dagger clattered into the dust. Silence fell. The human dropped the baton, his arms heavy, his body swaying. He looked around at the stunned faces in the crowd. His voice was weak but steady when he spoke. "Is this your justice? Is this what you call strength? To laugh at chains? To cheer for whips?" No one answered. The marketplace that had once echoed with cruel laughter was silent as stone. The only sound was the alien woman sobbing, her chains shaking as she whispered his name, though she did not even know it. The human turned back to her, his hand reaching out, though he was still too far. His blood stained the sand at his feet. His body looked ready to collapse, but his eyes never lost their fire. "I am not finished," he whispered. "Not until you are free." The crowd did not cheer now. They did not laugh. They only watched in awe and confusion, their hearts unsettled. Some felt anger, but others felt shame. And in the eyes of the alien woman, shining through tears, there was only one thing: faith that the human would save her, no matter what it cost. The human's breaths came rough and heavy, each inhale sharp with pain. His body shook, covered in blood and bruises, but he still refused to fall. Around him, the crowd had grown restless, no longer laughing as before. Whispers carried from one person to another, their voices uncertain. Some wanted the cruelty to continue. Others could not stop staring at the human who would not bend. The once loud marketplace now felt like a storm waiting to break. The guard who had been knocked down earlier crawled to his feet, clutching his stomach. His pride burned hotter than his wounds. He spat blood and shouted, "Hold him down! Break him apart!" His voice cracked with desperation. But even as he spoke, no one rushed forward. The crowd hesitated, eyes shifting from him to the human, as if unsure who truly held the strength now. The human's hand brushed against the whip that lay on the ground, the very weapon that had tormented the alien woman. His fingers curled around it slowly, his knuckles pale from the effort. The crowd gasped as he raised it, the leather dangling from his bloodied hand. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, with deliberate calm, he pulled hard, snapping the whip in two. The sound of the leather tearing echoed like thunder. The alien woman's eyes widened, tears streaming down her face. That whip had been her nightmare, the symbol of her suffering, and now he had destroyed it with his own hands. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, almost in disbelief, You broke it." The guards stared in shock. Their symbol of control, their tool of fear, was nothing but torn leather now. The human dropped the broken pieces into the dust. His voice, though hoarse, carried clear across the marketplace. "No more." The words rippled through the crowd. The alien woman's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She had dreamed of such a moment, of someone ending the cruelty, but she had never believed it could be real. Now she saw it with her own eyes, one human standing against them all. The first guard, humiliated and enraged, snatched up a chain from a nearby post. He swung it wildly, aiming for the man's head. The human ducked, the chain whistling past him. With a grunt, he grabbed the chain mid-swing, the metal cutting into his palms. He yanked hard, pulling the guard forward, and slammed his fist into the alien's jaw. The guard fell to the ground, his weapon ripped from his grasp. The other guards hesitated. Fear flickered in their eyes. The crowd shifted uneasily, some cheering, some whispering. Children clung to their parents, confused by the sudden turn of power. For the first time, the guards looked like prey instead of hunters. The human turned back to the chained woman, his chest heaving. He reached for her bindings, pulling against the metal. His muscles strained, his skin tearing as the iron dug into his fingers. At first, the chains held, but with a growl of effort, he tore at them again and again. The woman gasped as the first shackle cracked. Her hand dropped free, numb and bloodied. Her lips parted in shock, her voice breaking. You freed me." The human nodded once, moving to the other shackle. His vision blurred with pain, but he forced himself to keep going. He pulled, twisted, and with a final wrench, the second chain snapped loose. The alien woman collapsed forward, catching herself weakly on his chest. Her body trembled, her tears wetting his blood-soaked shirt. The crowd gasped again. No one had ever seen her free. No one had ever dared break the chains. And now she stood, supported by a human who should have been broken long ago. The guards snarled, rushing toward them, but the human swung the broken chain like a weapon. It clanged against armor, knocking one back. He turned his body to shield the woman, keeping her close behind him. His movements were slower now, heavy with exhaustion, but his determination burned hotter than ever. The alien woman clutched at his arm, her voice weak but urgent. "You can't fight them all. They will kill you." The human glanced at her, his face pale, his eyes fierce. "If they kill me, I will fall knowing you are free," he said. "That is enough." Her heart clenched painfully. No one had ever spoken such words to her. No one had ever chosen her life over their own. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything to help him. For the first time, she wished she had strength of her own to give. The crowd shifted again. Some cheered for the human now, their voices growing bolder. Others shouted in anger, demanding the guards strike him down. The air buzzed with conflict. The marketplace no longer united in cruelty. Seeds of rebellion stirred in the hearts of the watchers. The guard with the dagger, face twisted with rage, lunged once more. The human caught his wrist, twisting until the blade fell. With a swift kick, he sent the weapon skidding across the dirt. His grip tightened around the guard's arm, and with one hard shove, he threw him into the dust. The alien woman's breath caught as she saw the impossible. This broken, bleeding man was winning. Blood dripped from the human's wounds, staining the ground beneath him. His vision blurred, his body screamed in agony, but still he stood tall, defying them all. He looked at the woman again, and though his lips barely moved, she heard him clearly. "You are free. Remember that." Her knees buckled, but this time it was not from weakness. It was from the overwhelming force of hope. She pressed a shaking hand to her chest, whispering, "I will never forget." The broken whip lay in the dirt. The chains that had bound her lay shattered. The guards, once feared, lay beaten at the feet of a man who should not have survived. And in the eyes of the crowd, the human was no longer just a stranger. He was something more, proof that cruelty could be challenged, that one voice could silence 100 jeers, that one act of courage could change everything. The marketplace stood frozen, holding its breath. The human swayed on his feet, his strength nearly gone. But the fire in his eyes remained. He had given everything, shed every drop of blood, but he had done what no one else dared. He had ended the whip, broken the chains, and lit a spark in the heart of a woman who had long forgotten how to hope. The air was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that pressed on the chest and made every heartbeat sound loud. Dust hung in the sunlight, drifting slowly over the broken whip, the fallen guards, and the blood that stained the ground. The human stood swaying, his breath ragged, his body torn open by lashes and strikes. Yet he did not kneel. His eyes, though weary, still burned with the same fire that had carried him from the first lash to this very moment. The alien woman clung weakly to his side, her wrists raw where the chains had once bound her. She could hardly believe she was free. Every step she had taken in the marketplace had been in shackles, every word forced into silence. Now she stood beside a man who had bled for her freedom. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Why did you not let them kill me? Why did you give your blood for mine?" The human turned his head slowly toward her, his expression calm even through the pain. "Because your life has value," he said simply, "because someone had to say no. And if no one else would, then it had to be me." Her eyes filled with tears, not of despair this time, but of something she had never thought she would feel again, gratitude. She lowered her head, her voice breaking. "I thought I was nothing. I thought I would die nameless, but you." Her words faltered, and she could only whisper, "Thank you." The crowd stood frozen, staring at the scene. They had come for laughter, for cruelty, for a show that cost only a coin. But what they had witnessed instead was something no coin could buy. One human had turned their mockery into shame, their cheers into silence. Whispers stirred among them, soft at first, but growing. He stood for her. He bled for her. Some even muttered with unease, "What if we were in chains? Would anyone have saved us?" The guards who remained upright looked at each other nervously. Their authority was slipping. The human had broken their whip, defeated their blows, and freed a slave in front of the entire market. They could not erase what everyone had seen. Fear flickered in their eyes. The first guard, clutching his stomach where the baton had struck, forced himself upright. His voice shook as he shouted, "He is nothing, just a human! Take him! Take him now!" But his words no longer carried the same weight. No one moved. Even the guards at his side hesitated, unwilling to step forward. The human leaned against the broken post where the woman had been chained, his strength nearly gone. He looked at the crowd, his chest heaving, and his voice rang out, hoarse but clear. You watched as she was whipped for your laughter. You paid coins for her suffering. And you thought it made you strong. But strength is not found in cruelty. Strength is found in standing for those who cannot stand. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some lowered their heads, ashamed. Others clenched their fists, angry at being spoken to like guilty children. Yet none could deny the truth in his words. The alien woman looked at him with wide eyes. Every syllable he spoke carved deep into her heart. For years, she had been silenced, told she was worthless, told she was nothing but a slave. And now, in front of all, this human declared that her suffering mattered, that her life was worth fighting for. The guard snarled, picking up the dagger from the ground. His pride screamed louder than his pain. With a roar, he charged at the human, blade raised high. The crowd gasped. The alien woman cried out, "No!" and threw herself forward, but the human moved first. With the last of his strength, he stepped into the strike. His hand shot out, gripping the guard's wrist mid-swing. Blood ran down his arm from the effort, but his grip was iron. Slowly, painfully, he twisted, forcing the dagger to the ground. The guard's knees buckled, his body collapsing into the dust. The human kicked the blade far away and stood tall over his fallen enemy. The marketplace erupted, not with cheers this time, but with shouts of shock. Some voices cried for revenge, but others shouted in awe. A few even called out, "Free her! Free them all!" The tide was turning. The alien woman dropped to her knees, staring up at him as if he were more than human. Her voice was soft, but carried the weight of her heart. "You saved me? You saved my soul." She pressed her forehead to the ground before him, her tears falling into the dust. For the first time, it was not humiliation that made her kneel, but gratitude. The human shook his head, reaching down to lift her gently by the arm. His voice was low, almost tender. "Do not bow, stand. You are free now." Her legs trembled as she rose, standing beside him, her chains lying broken at her feet. She looked at the crowd, and though her voice shook, she dared to speak. "You see him bleed, but he did not break. You see me freed, and yet I was nothing to you. If he, a stranger, could stand for me, what excuse do you have?" The words struck deeper than any whip. The crowd looked at her, no longer a slave, but a woman who had found her voice again. The silence that followed was heavier than before, filled with shame, fear, and the faint spark of awakening. The human's body finally gave out. His knees bent, and he began to fall, but the woman caught him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. She held him up, whispering through her tears, "I have you. I will not let you fall alone." The guards backed away, their courage gone. The people watched, their hearts torn. Something had changed forever in that place. The whip would never again be just a game. The chains would never again seem unbreakable. The alien woman pressed her forehead against the human's, her voice trembling with both sorrow and fierce pride. "You lit a fire they cannot put out. Even if they kill us here, your courage will live." The human's lips curved faintly, though his eyes fluttered with exhaustion. "Then let it burn," he whispered. And in that moment, the marketplace of cruelty was no longer a place of laughter. It became the place where one human, broken and bleeding, had stood against all odds, freed a woman from chains, and taught an entire crowd that cruelty was not strength. The story would spread, carried by whispers and retold as legend. The day a man gave his blood to end a whip, and a woman once broken learned to stand tall again.